What's up, Architecture10B? I hope everybody has had a great spring break and you're ready and amped to get into this week's assignment. For this week, we're actually in week number 10 of the semester, so we're looking at about maybe a month and a half until we finish the whole class. And so this week, we're kicking off lecture number 10, which essentially deals with the schematic design phase of our project. I'm going to go through the lecture and kind of give you guys an outline at the end of what is required and due for this week. I have kind of planned it out to be a progress deadline for this Friday the 24th, and then we will have our final deadline for this portion of the project on May 1st. So let's dive in and let's go. So when we're talking about schematic design for this week, what we're really talking about is the very first steps of conceptualizing and making our ideas. A lot of you had really good collages from last week's assignment, pre-spring break, that dealt with taking information from the site, the collected data, and turning them into visual concepts with collaging. And so what we're going to move into next is now a departure from just the visualization and diving into the programmatic and the massing aspects of it. And program and massing, both the textual and the visual, are critical tools that we use to describe the relationship between functions of program and the actual form and the massing of a design. From this point forward, I do want to let you know each one of you is required to have the 2D drawings of the existing site and a 3D model with contextual massing. So what I mean by that? For the plans, what we're going to be dealing with here is both the site plan and the floor plan. And the reason why these are super important is it's going to base the site with all of the streets that are surrounding the existing market and the existing site. And the 3D model is going to help us contextualize the heights and the density around the area in which we're working with. And so if you don't already have this done, it was recommended that you start it over spring break, and I would say to take the next couple of days to finalize both the site plan and the floor plan, so you can get into modeling maybe the second day, and then start plugging in some of the concepts that you'll see in this presentation. So once you've set up the 2D drawings and you've set up your 3D model for the context, we're going to put those aside for a second and we're going to go into the user experience. So most of you have probably never done this before, but I kind of want you to think about this process as sort of outlining your client. So what do I mean by the user experience? We're technically identifying the users who will be designing the project for, right? This is who we are creating this space for. And we want to imagine this as creating an outline of the client and taking all of their needs to inform our process. So in addition to, let's say, the programmatic elements that create a residence or a dwelling, I want us to also consider the COVID-19 research that you have collected and how it impacts the user, their needs, and the needs of space. So this is impacting our overall design. So when you look at users, I want you to identify, are you designing for an elderly couple? Are you designing for a younger couple? Are you designing for someone who has physical accommodations requirements? Is your client an artist or a woodworker that requires a workshop? Do they have pets? Are they a chef or a baker that requires special equipment in the kitchen or some kind of accessory space to execute their art and job? So this is sort of a base criteria of what I mean by defining the user, but it's really essentially up to each and one of you based on the research you've collected and the data you've analyzed about Lincoln Heights and the demographics and all of the gentrification items that were packed into that presentation. This is sort of where we're now going to extract that and make the users kind of come alive a little bit. And so once we've done the users, what I want us to dive into is making the program itself. So, we've identified the users and now we need to develop the list, which will specify each of the functions and their corresponding square footage. You're being asked to create a cohesive list, and this is going to be for each one of the 4 people we're designing for, and I'll get into that in a bit. But I have provided and listed some square footage here to give you kind of a general idea of size of the spaces you need to include, but the exact square footage, should be actually tailored to your design. It should be tailored to your users and your overall research. So here's an overview really quick of the program list. I'm calling this sort of the parameters, which will be the minimums to include. And this follows more or less a typical residential project. I'm asking you to include parking, a kitchen, a bathroom, bedrooms, storage spaces, a living space, courtyard or a garden space, community space that the community can access, not just the residents, and a connection to your neighbors. Now, most of you will recall that we've been spending a lot of time on the case study of the Schindler House on Kings Road, and the courtyard and garden spaces and how those were laid out in that configuration, how the bedrooms were dealt with, how the kitchen was dealt with as a communal space. These are all concepts and ideas that can help inform these minimums that I'm wanting you to include in your designs. And if you look here on the right of the sketchbook, there's a couple of maximums to follow. Not too many restrictions, but I had to put at least 3 in. I want us to respect and match the existing building height of the market, and I don't want us to kind of exceed that height. I don't want you to be creating these super ginormous 100-foot skyscrapers on the site. Another thing to kind of follow here is the property lines. We're going to respect these and kind of treat them as the bounds of our design restrictions, okay? So nothing overreaching the street and nothing kind of violating the back portion where the other houses exist. We're going to be very respectful and mindful of where the property lines are. And last but not least is a 50% lot coverage. And in this way, we're not going to create a full dense and jam-packed program in the lot, but rather we're going to give it some breathability, and we're going to allow for some green space opportunities and some open air and lighting opportunities as well. So when I mentioned that there were some programs and suggested sizes that I'm including, this is the slide which has that. And each of you have developed a special understanding of this site, as I mentioned, with your collaging and all the research and the data you're collecting. And so this program should be unique to your research. And I would say, a really good tip here is to kind of start off with a list of making the program requirements, and then you kind of allocate the space you need for each part of the design. This can be specific to the user that you've identified. It could be specific to a need you've identified that the community requires at this moment in time in that space. It can be based off COVID-19 research you've done about let's say the 6-foot distancing, things like that. So I'm going to go over through these minimums really quick, but by all means these are minimums, so don't feel that you have to be necessarily committed to this exact size or configuration. It can vary depending on your design. So I'm asking you to include 2 bedrooms at 120 square foot each, 1 bathroom at a minimum of 40 square feet, 1 kitchen at about 200, living space at 216, 1 storage space for 75 square feet. And when I mean storage, it can be anything like cabinetry, it can be a garage, it can be places where you can just store equipment or machinery. It doesn't necessarily just mean closets and things like that. 1 parking space. Do your clients drive? Do they not drive? Do they take public transportation? But the minimum would be to require to put 1 parking space per design. And a courtyard garden, about 400 square feet. And the interior ceiling heights that I think will be a good minimum will be 8 feet. Okay. And so here below are a couple of other minimums to consider. I want us to be mindful and have connections to neighbors. And you will each be designing for 4 adult inhabitants, 2 couples. So this kind of echoes a little bit of the Schindler project, right? Where they designed for 2 adult couples, 4 individuals. And be mindful, how do you create individual and privacy spaces in a communal setting. And the last one there is the community space. But the last two, if you notice, have kind of asterisks on them. And the reason being is the adult inhabitants, unlike the Schindler project, for our project here, I'm asking you to include housing for one couple who may be found already living in Lincoln Heights. I would call these locals. And then maybe one couple who may be new to the area, which I guess we could technically call transplants, right? People who are new here, who are bringing either new industry or they're coming because of the industry of some sort. And so the idea here is that we are going to try to establish a balance in between a local group and a new group, right? Old generation and a new generation. In terms of the community space there, the one with the double asterisks, this will depend on the lot designated in your group to become the communal activity or the community access point. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but we're going to be subdividing the lot, so it's not going to be one site per student, but rather you're going to be working in groups of 5. But we'll dive into that in a second. So let's look over the maximums really quick. I mentioned matching the existing market building height at about 30 feet. We're going to respect the property lines, and these are the boundaries that we are set to follow. We're going to provide a maximum of 2 parking spaces. I don't want someone to build a parking lot, which is essentially what the site already is in the front part, right? So I'm just maximum will be 2 spaces. And for the dwelling itself, meaning the kitchen, the bathroom, living room, bedrooms, etc., I want us to consider maybe a 1,200 square foot maximum for the dwelling itself. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be for the workshop area your artist requires, or the garden space. That's not included. This is specifically for the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the kitchen, kind of the essential functions of the dwelling unit itself. And last but not least, which I mentioned before, we're going to have a 50% lot coverage. So once you've identified the program, you have your list, and you have each square footage identified for the functions you're going to include in your design, we're going to go on into what's called massing. And at this point, we are essentially developing massing studies of the proposed program list. And this starts tapping into a little bit of the form, which starts tapping into what we call the actual design of this, right? So the massing shall be the program and the functions that we've identified configured to your unique research and users. Now, you may use the square footage, again, that I've stated and provided here as a list of requirements as a general idea, but the exact square footage should be tailored to your design and to your users. What do we want to see? For the program massing, I'm sure you guys are very familiar with this diagram that I've used in a lecture before. I want to see program massing in 3D blocks. So let's take this for example. Let's say the yellow is all storage spaces. I mass out the 75 square feet at minimum into a 3D massing. Let's say the red is all bathrooms. I mass out the square footage for the bathrooms and I place them accordingly. Now, this is what I'm talking about when I'm referring to a program massing diagram and blocking. Now, the massing schemes, which will be essentially the configurations of that program massing, look something like this, where you're now taking the component, let's say, of the retail and the office, the residential and the hotel, and you're telling me in this cube, they're sort of configured in this order, or you're looking down the one on the right, where you have the garden, the culture, and the passage, and you're telling me that they're arranged in a stack order. So this is what I'm talking about when I speak of massing schemes. You can do these either digitally or physically. My recommendation, because we are dealing with a virtual kind of online course, is to keep it digital because it's easier to share the model or the views and kind of export them and such. But it's not to say that physical models also help us understand and grasp the 3D elements of our designs. And so if you have, let's say, the 3 schemes laid out, that will be required for this next portion, and you want to take one of them into a physical model, I highly advise that you do. And maybe you don't, detail the whole thing, but just taking that maybe one of the 3 ideas that you like the most and detailing it out physically can actually help you have a better understanding of how things are working, either, in vertical section or horizontal section. It's a different understanding of the space. And so here's a little bit of the plot twist, right? So number 5, the site configuration. I mentioned earlier that the communal space was going to vary depending on what the group chose as the communal access or community space. And so what does that mean? That means that each of you will be grouped to work with 5 other students and create a communal solution for the project. Each group will work together to decide the area of the site that you will want to develop with your design. And the possibilities are endless here on how you choose to go about the lot, but each group must dedicate at least one lot for communal activities and that community access. And these solutions for the community should be solely based on your research and all the collected data that you have for both the macro view of Lincoln Heights and for the micro of the project site. Let's look at this visually here. When we started off, I said, make sure that you have at least a 2D plan, site plan, and a floor plan of the existing conditions. What we're doing is we're taking the existing site and subdividing it into 6 lots. Now, there's going to be 4 lots where you're working kind of in the open area, and there's going to be 2 lots where you're required to work with the existing market building. And that is lot number 2 and lot number 4. And each lot has a different square footage assigned to it, depending on the variation of the sizes. And each lot is subdivided with 20-foot streets coming across the site. Now, so what does this mean for you? Within your group, you have to decide as a whole which lot you're going to design. Is it going to be number 5, number 4, number 1, whatever? Choose it, and then as a group, you have to tell me, hey, we've decided that I'm going to do this lot, that we're going to do this lot, and we're going to leave lot number 3 as being the communal lot, or we're going to leave lot number 2 as being the communal lot. And then I know that the 5 of you will be working on the other areas and individually, and that collectively you will be working on that area together. Our next deadline is scheduled for Friday, April 24th. Now, something to note is that this deadline is not a final deadline, but rather it's a progress deadline. And what I mean by that is the users and all of the content that I had gone through before the massings themselves and the schemes themselves, that should be pretty much finalized, leaving the 3D massings and schemes to be developed another week. So let's go into each requirement so you're able to see what I'm talking about. So for presentation, what I want to see is your users defined with the needs outlined. And as I mentioned, we're designing for two couples, 4 adults, and we want to make sure that you're able to design for a couple that is, let's say, existing in Lincoln Heights or a local group, and a couple that is new to Lincoln Heights, which is technically, transplants or new generation that's influx into Lincoln Heights. Number 2, we need to define any additional program you would like to include. The examples I was providing was, is your client an artist, are they a baker, etc. And once you've identified those needs, what is the programmatic aspects that they require in your design? And number 3, I want to see a written statement of your design proposal, which must include COVID-19 effects, explain why you are working on your chosen lot, and what is your design solution going to provide to the existing Lincoln Heights community. Now, I've made a 300-word maximum for this because I don't want to read really long essays. This is just a maximum. You can do a minimum of whatever you need to do in order to get the statement across. But I want to know in written word how COVID-19 has impacted what you're considering for your design solution, How are you, contributing to the existing community? And why did you choose the lot you chose in the configuration of 6? And, also as a group, there has to be some kind of discourse as to why you left the lot communal the way you did, and what is the reason behind that. Now, talking a little bit more architectural visuals and things like that, I want to see a program list and the corresponding square footage to each program component. Once you've kind of provided that list out, I want to see a program massing in 3D blocks, color-coded as shown in that diagram, where we have, I think I used an example of the yellow being the storage, the red being the bathrooms, etc. I want to see just a simple massing with color codes, and you're telling me this is all the program, this is basically a kit of parts before you go into your design schemes, okay? Number 7, I want to see 3 massing schemes for your proposed program configuration. So these can be loose and kind of playful right now. This is sort of the part that I was saying we don't need to have finalized by this Friday, but you definitely need to have 3 massing schemes started. Okay, so if it's not completely resolved, that's okay. But I want to see 3 massing schemes, because what's going to happen is we're going to choose one of the 3, which you're going to move forward with for the design development. So do more now so we can just choose one and you can refine one later. So, be playful with it. How do you configure the program? Remember the examples that I showed of the massing being stacked, of the retail, the office, the hotel. These are all configurations. Is it on the 2nd floor? Is it on the 1st floor? Is it 100 feet wide or is it 10 feet wide? This is sort of where having that program list is going to be crucial, so then you're able just to mass out and play with the configurations of the spaces. And last but not least, I want to see a site plan for each one of the schemes that you'll be proposing. So this could be a simple drawing over the 2D drawing of the existing site, or you can give me a 3D massing site plan over the existing 3D model of the site. Okay, that'll be your choice. But either way, I need to see 3 site plans for the 3 design schemes that you're massing out this week. I'm providing here a drawing scale. These are scales that are to be used if you're going to do an 11:17 formatted presentation, which I highly advise since we've been doing that all semester. For the site plan, something that fits nicely is a 1/64 of an inch equals a foot. And for the floor plan, you can do it at 1/32. Please know that all content listed is individually due in a PDF presentation format via Canvas. The group Zoom meet on Friday is recommended, but it is not required. So I know everybody works in different schedules and we have different things going on, but on Friday we will have a virtual Zoom meeting, and I'm going to do 1 meeting per 5-person group, and we'll kick off at noon and we'll start going over the projects together to prepare for the finalization of how you have chosen the site to work with, the communal space, and how everyone is kind of using that space to the best of their ability. So for questions and comments, what I will do is we will have a discussion group Monday at 1 p.m., which we can go over questions and answers and just kind of have an informal discussion for any questions that arise through this lecture. And then Wednesday we can have another one, which will be just sort of a check-in. And then Friday, I'm thinking I will make the assignments due at 10 a.m. because we will kick off at noon having these meetings. And so I want to make sure I have everyone's file prior to commencing the kickoffs. I'm sure a lot of you will have questions about the group you're in, and that will be posted on Canvas. So make sure you tune in. I've created that lot subdivision, right? That plan that we looked at of the 6 portions. I will make this available on a DWG on Canvas as well. All right, and that's it for this week. This essentially will carry us over until May 1st, but you have all of the content now. And I look forward to hearing from you.